You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to episode 17 of the Archaeotech Podcast. Today we're joined by Steve Fowler of Interapt, a mobile and wearable technology development company. And we'll be talking about virtual reality, augmented reality, and what they mean for the future of archaeology. Let's go to the show.
Okay, welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast. We've got myself and our co-host, Chris Sims. Chris?
Hey.
And we're bringing on a special guest, Steve Fowler. Steve, how's it going?
Going well. How are you doing, Chris?
Pretty good. Chris and Chris. We're going to deal with that a lot on this podcast, I have a feeling. Yeah. We're going to have to go with Webby and Boone, I think. That's the only way to really cover the basis. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about now is a lot of things, but and I'll let Steve introduce himself and kind of give his background so you can get a better idea of what we're going to talk about. But we're going to get into some virtual reality and visualization stuff for archaeology. How can a lot of these new and not even really new in some cases technologies come out, just new kind of to archaeology, but a quickly changing field with virtual reality and visualization and all that stuff. You know, virtual reality has been around. I'm sure we all remember the pterodactyl game in the mall 15, 20 years ago. I know I played that and spent a lot of money on it. And, but that's what that thing was capable of. Now we can do so much more. And the thing is, it's cheaper and smaller and faster, and it's becoming an actual usable tool. So we're going to talk about all that stuff and possibly how we can bring this into archaeology. So Steve, why don't you start by telling us who you are, what you do, and what you bring to the table?
Sure thing. Well, my name is Steve Fowler. I am the Senior Marketing Director here at Interapt. We are a mobile and wearable development firm. So we help companies find ways that high tech can solve their problems, whether it's that save significant money. Sometimes it's through streamlining their processes. Sometimes it's through building platforms for employee training. Sometimes it's employee engagement. Sometimes it's customer engagement. But we just kind of try and figure out what the newest and coolest high-tech stuff out there can do to help solve problems for people. So that's we've been around for about almost 5 years now, but we were spun off of a previous technology company. We're based here in Louisville, Kentucky, but we've been able to kind of make waves working with companies like Google, partnering with them on development for Google Glass. And partnering with a lot of other firms and just kind of making our way and making waves, and so that's kind of we're really growing and so I guess that's really the gist of who I am and who I work for.
Okay, now let's get this out of the way right away. What the hell happened to Google Glass? Do you know anything?
Well, so Google Glass was initially called the Explorer Edition, and that first edition is essentially a prototype that was released to the public it was almost like, field testing, but getting people to pay you to do it. So It was really just a brilliant marketing job by Google, number one, but it ended up shooting them in the foot because there were a lot of things about Google Glass and about technology being worn and broadcasting it culturally that they couldn't have predicted, or maybe they did and they just wanted to see what would happen. Sometimes I like to think of companies like Google as just these people who have just a vast amount of resources that just want to see what happens when they tweak this or that about society at this point. Mm-hmm. But that initial prototype edition was shelved because it has been actually made into a product instead of a prototype. So now they're in the phase of redeveloping the hardware, improving the internal components of it. That includes the chip, the camera, the processor, the actual device itself, the way it's constructed. And they've got a lot of different teams and a lot of new brains working on the next version. And that's really what happened to it. So it's still being worked on, but they're sort of retooling it for based on all the feedback they got and all of the results of the big experiment that was the Explorer program.
Okay. Well, that's good to know because they kind of dropped off the face of the earth about a year ago, and I was afraid they'd scrapped it and didn't continue on with it because it's an amazing device and has amazing potential. So
yeah,
it's nice to know they're still working on it.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with they're not just deciding what to do with Google Glass. They're, a lot of companies out there are deciding what to do with augmented reality in general.
Yeah, right.
That's why Google bought Magic Leap. It's another similar kind of company working on augmented reality, but it's going to be different than Google Glass. But there are rumors going around that, who knows, what maybe it might be a combination of Glass with whatever Magic Leap's technology is. We don't even know that, even as Google partners. So they're keeping that very close to the vest. But we'll see. I have a feeling it's going to be something really game changing when they eventually release it to the public.
Well, let's move through the augmented reality devices before we get to the virtual reality devices like Oculus. Let's go to HoloLens. What do you think about Microsoft's HoloLens and where that's at? Because that's coming to market real soon, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And well, I mean, real soon. I'm not quite sure if they've actually put a date on it. It might be 2017 before it's actually available to the public. But at the very least, it's 2016. So it's still a ways out. They're still perfecting it. But the difference, of course, between something like HoloLens and something like Google Glass. Google Glass is just a prism that looks like, because of the way you wear it, it looks like it's hovering over your line of sight. Right. Whereas HoloLens isn't a completely, it's a complete screen over everything that you're seeing. And so that's a very different, approach to augmented reality. So HoloLens, Samsung, Sony, everyone is really kind of jumping in on the augmented reality bandwagon, if you will, because they want to grab market share, even though there's hardly any there to begin with at this point, because everyone's still trying to figure out how do we use it. But they know that it's sort of the next thing to have data that you can call up in real time displayed over your field of vision. It's just sort of where, you think it's something that, like, for example, Apache pilots have had these for over a decade, similar concepts. So now they're just moving this into consumer and enterprise and how these technologies fit into those industries.
Okay, well, that sounds good. I was in the military, and I also worked for a flight simulator development company called Flight Safety International, and they had some stuff like that they were dealing with for some of their military flight simulators, and it was pretty amazing. It was like playing a ridiculous video game, but it was pretty awesome. And thinking about that stuff coming to consumer market is pretty phenomenal. But like you said, we're going to be dealing with things like the HoloLens would be really difficult to wear in the field, like in the desert when it's 110 degrees out.
Yep.
That'd be, not only would it probably fail immediately, but it would probably cook your head in the meantime.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I think, obviously, like you just said, the kind of hardware that you build for the military is going to differ than what goes into the public sector. And I don't think that's really going to change just because technology is getting cheaper and easier to make. People are just getting smarter about how to build on it, and platforms are getting more stable and reliable. I think it's still going to be, the people with the most money are still going to have the coolest toys. But with that said, obviously somebody like Google, who has the amount of capital that they do, can clearly afford to invest in R&D. They have plenty of different what they call moonshot programs, whether Google Glass was one of them. The self-driving car, of course, most people know about that. Things like Project Loon, where they're actually going to be bringing internet to the world. They're very much moonshot projects, but they're the kinds of companies that are going to be driving the research and development for those innovations. So,
right now, Facebook's moonshot by buying Oculus. Why don't we talk about Oculus? Because a lot of people have probably heard of Oculus. They've had an amazing social media and mainstream media campaign, but a lot of people probably don't know exactly what Oculus is and what it means. It's not augmented reality, is it? So why don't you tell everybody what that is?
Okay, so where the difference, of course, between virtual reality and augmented reality is that where augmented reality places data in front of your actual view of the world, virtual reality immerses you in a completely computer-generated environment. Now, Oculus, the real innovation with Oculus had to do with the coding and the algorithms that they came up with to help Oculus predict where your head was going to turn while it was turning. And recalculating that just an insane number of times per second. The traditional virtual reality systems of a decade ago, that was the the common sort of you never really felt like you were in the environment because there was so much latency and so much lag between when you would move and when it would move. And they've really just honed in on it. They perfected it and made it almost instant and unnoticeable in terms of the difference between. So being immersed in an environment, of course, presents a lot of different kinds of scenarios. If you can't see what's actually in front of you, then the environment that you're in has to be useful somehow. Mm-hmm. So are you looking at a computer animated environment, or are you, for example, immersed in a live feed from a 360-degree camera, right? So there's a lot of different use cases, and a device like Oculus can integrate with devices like Leap Motion, which are a hands-free interface. And so, for example, if you were making gestures with your hands while wearing Oculus, it would detect it, and you would see your hands immersed in that environment. So it's sort of a combination of like actual real-world objects mixed with whatever that sort of computer-generated environment would be.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I'm really looking forward to Oculus because I can think of some decent uses for it. But like you were saying, that lag, I know one of the earlier problems, and I think from the sounds of it, Oculus has fixed this with their massively rapid updating screens, basically, is if there's even a millisecond of lag, you're going to vomit all over the inside of this thing. It just makes you sick.
Yeah, which is kind of cool, but not necessarily marketable. Yeah,
Right.
So that and to be honest, something that you said, I would even hesitate. Obviously, $2 billion is a lot of money, but I would even hesitate to call what Facebook did with Oculus a moonshot. I think Facebook saw opportunity. When you think about it, they only paid $1 billion for Instagram, and they've I think it's at about 500 million users now, something insane. And they were offering $3 billion to Snapchat, at least the rumors were. So really, it wasn't that much of a moonshot. They knew it was something that they could take advantage of because the market's not just going to be gaming, because that's the first thing people think of when they go to Oculus, which is fair because that's going to be what probably produces the most revenue. But you think about any other kinds of environments where it would help for you to be immersed. For example, things that you talked about being in the military and seeing really complex simulators. Well, if you make that a virtual reality simulator, all of a sudden, the kind of possibilities sort of open up with, well, if we can create the most detailed environment, we don't have to actually put people in dangerous situations, but we can make it feel like it is. So, there's a lot of possibilities with Oculus beyond gaming. So I think that's what Facebook knew, and they knew that virtual reality was going to be sort of the next kind of technology that would take off, and they just got ahead of the pack, and it was smart business on their part.
Okay. Well, I think I only mentioned it as like a moonshot sort of thing because it's yet to be proven. I mean, the public at large seems to be interested in this kind of stuff, but whether or not it'll actually work out for them, like let's just use 3D TVs as an example. I mean, that kind of failed miserably because people don't like wearing glasses in their living room.
Right.
So,
right. I think there's a big difference between, the kind of the audience of people who are into that advanced gaming versus versus counting on families everywhere wanting to wear 3D glasses. That's a stretch. And honestly, that is a product of the TV industry trying to stay relevant. They don't really know what else they can do now with the curved screens, 4K, 5K, 1000K. Who cares? It's like it looks pretty damn realistic at this point. Sorry, can I cuss? I just did.
Totally.
It's
encouraged.
It's like there's nothing else left for the TV industry to do. Now they're trying to do smart TVs, which is sort of even an archaic concept because they can't update their hardware at the pace of everything else that's updating. So it's really better to get like an Apple TV and just plug it into any one of your multiple monitors or TVs or whatever you got. But I think, Facebook also did that because they wanted to stay relevant with kids. I'm going to tell you, I do a lot of events. Our company does a lot of events where we show off with this kind of technology to kids, whether it's for programs like Junior Achievement, Urban League, various organizations that help young people, and they go a beeline right for the Oculus Rift. They are fascinated with it, they are enthralled by it, and they can't get enough of it. When Oculus comes to market, they are going to be bugging their parents to death to get it for them. I don't care what it costs. So I think that's the future of Oculus and why Facebook went after it, honestly.
Nice. Well, that leads me to another question while we're talking about, before we talk about applicability to archaeology, I want to talk about when this stuff is coming out. So Oculus has been all over the place. Like you said, they go to events, they're showing people this thing. What is the holdup? What are they waiting for? Is it production? Are they trying to get costs down on this thing, or are they still working on software, or are they still working on hardware? I mean, where do you even know, like where they're at with this stuff?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine, but I would say, I think they probably, not that that's really the same thing, but think about Google Glass. I mean, it was ready to go, hardware is built, all done, ready to go to market, and it kind of did, obviously in a limited release. And then what happened? It just caused a lot of uproar about privacy and where technology is going if there's too much. And so I think they're kind of just biding their time. They're getting a go-to-market strategy that works best for them, and I think that's really what the holdup is.
I guess they got all that cold hard Facebook cash too to let them sit on their heels a little bit while they perfect it.
yeah. Oculus is not their lifeline. I think it's just something cool, and they're just biding their time because they want to make it. They want to position it right.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's smart, but sometimes you just got to bring something to market, and get it out there.
Yeah.
It's true. That's true. We talk about, execution here, about done is better than perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Minimum viable product, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else that's maybe up and coming that we're going to be able to talk about here in a minute before we go to the break that we haven't mentioned?
Well, I know that something Chris asked me about, what the current state of technology, and I think a lot of this revolves around big data and data science. Because let's see, so back in 2010, I guess he was then chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt. He said we produced more data in 2 days than we did all the way in entire history up to 2003.
Whoa!
That's 5 years ago that he said that. So think about how many more devices we have now, and the so-called Internet of Things trend that are hooking into that are getting into the cloud, and they're sending data, and we're collecting it. We're having to build bigger data storage centers. Data scientists say the main question they're trying to solve is how do we interact and glean insights, which we commonly call analytics, from large data sets. And the main barrier to that is privacy. For example, healthcare is a big, obviously, data in healthcare is gold. And there are data scientists that say that the info, unfortunately, is so closely guarded that it's impossible to go to a single data source and look for data patterns on any serious health issue. But they claim that if they had open access to all of this, that they could end several diseases within a decade. So we're talking about some pretty serious advances that are just going to come just because we're collecting more information from things.
Yeah, and that's super relevant to us in the environmental and social sciences, because we can collect all sorts of data in the field with new technologies that are coming out. I had a geologist who was in the field with me on one of my digs, who said that our current state of technology is such that we're not limited by technology. We're limited by our data sets. And so we just need people to go out and start generating usable data in a manner that we can work with. So that's pretty cool.
Yep.
And we collect tons of data.
Yeah. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that after the break. I want to talk, now that we've talked about some of the devices, let's talk about in the next segment what we can do with this possibly when it comes out, and whether or not it's overkill and whether or not it's even worth it, and then talk about some sort of blue sky kind of stuff as far as what we could possibly do if we had the right technology. So let's take a break real quick. And I think if everything goes right, we're going to play an iPad mini promo right now, and check that out, because there's only less than a month, well, a little more than a month to enter this contest. So if you're listening to this podcast when it came out, if you're listening to this in like 3 years, well, there's probably the iPad 16 out right now, and whatever you have right now is obsolete. So all right, back after a minute. Hello everyone, Chris Webster here from the Archaeology Podcast Network, and we're giving away an iPad Mini 4 to one of our listeners. The iPad Mini 4 came out in September. It's a 16 gigabyte space gray iPad with AT&T cellular ready antenna. All that means is it comes with GPS. You do not need to get a data plan. And you don't even need to be on AT&T if you never plan to get a data plan. It just has GPS.
It also has a fingerprint sensor and Apple Pay ready and all the good perks that come with that. So it's a good iPad. We use them in the field. There are 2 easy ways to enter. 1, do a Profiles in CRM interview before December 15th, 2015, or recommend someone for an interview. You'll both get an entry once the interview is posted. If you want to know more about Profiles in CRM, go to www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/profiles. All the questions are listed right there. The other way to enter is to like the APN Facebook page and share it with your friends on Facebook to get the word out about our awesome podcasts. The winner will be announced December 16th, 2015 at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So get your entries in, send me those emails for people that want to do the Profiles in CRM podcast, and good luck to everyone. iMac, take us out with a binary solo. Okay, we're back. Now let's talk about, we've talked about what's going to be available, because none of this is actually kind of really available right now, at least not to archaeologists. Let's talk about, although Google Glass, I did apply for the Explorer program and, never got a word back. I figured I had a pretty good, a pretty good proposal for them saying what we were going to use it for, but apparently they didn't agree with me. But anyway, so let's talk about what this can be used for. I've written a couple blog posts, and if I remember, we'll try to link to those in the show notes. When Google Glass first came out, I immediately sketched up on my iPad a couple of ideas I had for what Google Glass could be used for, or something like some augmented reality device that's not only lightweight, but isn't going to cause your head to sweat massively. I mean, you can attach sunglasses to this thing, so it's kind of perfect for archaeologists. And yeah, so Steve, I know you're not familiar with archaeology too much, so let me say what I would, at a very minimum, what I would want something like Google Glass for. Some of our common everyday problems that no matter where you're working in this country, if you're on a phase 1 survey, which basically means it's a reconnaissance style, not reconnaissance, but it's a data collecting mission basically in its purest form. And on the East Coast, you're digging holes. On the West Coast, you're walking in the desert or you're walking across the landscape. But either way, you have common things like project boundaries. Okay, you've got these big boundaries that are drawn on these maps, and we've got devices, GPS devices, that show us where these boundaries are. And usually only one person has that piece of data, and they stopped the whole line. We walk in a line, and they stopped the line. Or if you're on the East Coast, you're digging a bunch of holes, and you know where these holes are supposed to be, and people generally pace it out, by just walking 30, however many paces makes them 30 meters. And then they'll dig a hole there, and they'll do that until the end of their line, which is some predetermined landmark, whether it's a point that the project manager has flagged out, or it's a road or a fence line. Usually, it's something that you can see. So, obviously, the first use I would see for Google Glass is I want to see a big red wall that I can look through. The minute I look up, I want to see this big red wall in front of me that says, "This is your project boundary," and I want to see dots on the landscape where if I'm digging shovel tests where I'm supposed to dig, and I can just walk right to that next one. I can sort of check it off, and ideally it would go probably hook to my smartphone, which would hook to a database, which would tell the crew chief, yes, this hole is done. And they can see them turning from red to green or something like that across the landscape as people dig their holes. That kind of data visualization on the real low end is something I'd like to see. And then kind of moving a step up from that, on, say, site recording in the desert out here, we have 3 or 4 people. They all have their tasks. They're recording artifacts. They're recording features. They're recording all these different things, site boundaries, stuff like that. I'd like to see, as they're recording this information, whatever they're recording that on, updating to some sort of on-site server that updates to your Google Glass device, so the crew chief can see this stuff popping up in their field of view as they're trying to plan how this site's going on. We had a massive site that we recorded last week that was just a lot of elements to this site. And as the crew chief, it would have been handy to see these things getting completed, to maybe assign these things as you're going through so they're red or something like that, and then watching them pop green as people record them and change them and add different things and do different things. So stuff like that is the kind of things that I would see. Do you think when these things start to come out that they're going to have the power for, let's say live data manipulation right off the bat, like adding information to them from the field and being able to see this update in real time? Or is it initially just going to be something like we upload all this information to the device before we leave for the field, and now we can see static things like project boundaries and stuff like that aren't going to change. What do you think that power is going to be for that when it first comes out?
Well, I think it's all going to depend on your connection to your data source. Whether it's going to be, if you're out in the field, obviously, I would say, more often than not, it's going to be hard to get an internet connection. And then you have to decide, well, because it's all almost any program, the technology is definitely there. Okay. And what you're talking about projecting an actual wall over the physical environment, things like that. Take a look at the Magic Leap demo. It's exactly what they're doing. They're basically building technology so that they can project virtual things into your real environment that look like they're physically there. It's kind of insane, but it could actually absolutely work that way. But the question is, you're talking about getting data and updating in real time. Well, what is the connection that device has with your main source of data? Is it over 4G wireless? Is it what might that be that you're connecting to, and how reliable is that connection? How much data can you send over it? What kind of bandwidth do you have? How many different devices are connected to it? There's a lot of factors that can affect the efficacy of that kind of tool, but the technology absolutely exists, and it's definitely feasible to do.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've been thinking about that because most of the areas we're in out here, we don't have a solid connection to the outside world usually.
Right.
But on-site, there's no reason we can't run like an on-site data server or even something in your backpack. You know what I mean? That's just running off a battery that's connecting all the devices and at least allowing the data collection devices to talk to the data display devices.
Definitely. And, widespread internet access is sort of the next, I think, leap in terms of, I don't know what you want to call it, like evolution, of our race. But I think there's the Industrial Revolution. I think this is sort of the information age, and I think access to information is really the key to growth and progress. And I think that's why, again, I mentioned something else that Google's another moonshot of Google, Project Loon, where they're trying to float balloons all over the world and deliver internet access to the most remote areas in the world. That solves your internet coverage problem, right? So that opens up a lot of other possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As far as like areas where we like cannot get a cell signal, period, what are the kinds of technologies that we can use to maybe work around that? Like, say you're out in a remote underdeveloped country, or even a part of North America that just flat out does not have cell coverage.
Mm-hmm. And so the question is, how do we work around it in those situations?
Yeah, like, is there a workaround that we have like right now where we can, like, if we're out in the field gathering all this data for real-time updates and sending data to servers in real time, that's pretty doable in an area like that has good cell coverage.
Mm-hmm.
How do we work around it in areas that don't have good cell coverage?
Well, so you're going to have to set up your own local network. I think Chris mentioned something about how they can. It's feasible for them to do that already, to have devices talk to each other and have basically take static information out into the field, and then update that database locally, but not being connected to a remote server. So that's one way to get around it in terms of being able to input data on site.
Nice.
And have it update in real time. But that's really the only feasible that I know of a way to work around not having an internet connection that can route your data to the cloud.
Yeah, and that could be pretty feasible indeed with the kind of field teams that go out and gather data. It could be like squad-based data updating.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Steve, have you had much experience in working with some of these devices? And because we're talking about displaying all these types of information and what you do, but how do you actually do that? Like, what does that look like? What do you use particular applications to do this, or is it basically like a CAD type of deal,
Yes.
like 3D printers use?
Right. So Google Glass, of course, is built on Android operating system.
Right.
So really all our developers have to do in terms of how to display, it's a full color display for one thing on Google Glass, but you have to remember the difference between having a a small window sort of panel looks like floating up and kind of to the right of your line of sight, versus having a screen that would go over everything you see, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the camera in Google Glass isn't quite on the bridge of the nose, but it still just looks like it's still first person. So you can see the image through it basically looks like a viewfinder. It looks like you're looking through a viewfinder, the camera, right? So that's how you would project the image that you're already seeing in front of you up into the display panel on Google Glass. From there, you know, it's really customizable. It's really malleable. As a developer, you can make it look any way you want. You can make it now within reason. You know, Google has some design standards, of course, that they want you to follow, but overall, you know, their objective is to make it as easy as possible for you to work with the system and for to display the information that you need. So it's pretty. You can manipulate it to pretty much to your whim.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty amazing.
Nice.
Yeah, Chris, you got some more ideas for how this could be used? Now, Chris, you've done a lot more work on the East Coast than I have. I just had some thoughts based on the shovel testing and stuff, but can you think of some ways this stuff could be used? Just kind of thinking outside the box as far as East Coast archaeology goes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much outside the box or as much as, you know, like Steve and I used to play Call of Duty together all the time. And we, you know, in those games, you've got like a heads-up display that has all sorts of visualizations in the game. And there were times when we would play that and I would say, you know, I need this in the field while I'm out doing this, you know, not actually blowing people up, but digging shovel tests. And but in the East though, we, you know, like if you find a site, say for an example's sake, if you find a large prehistoric site, you could be chasing flakes all day long in your shovel tests. And it would be incredibly useful to have, you know, even at least one person on your field team who is like the data manager to be able to visualize that and see in real time if a shovel test is popping up positive or negative, where the next shovel test needs to be. Because the way we did it in real time was sitting there with graph paper and saying, okay, well, we've got a positive over here. We need to go 10 meters to the north. Except, you know, most of the time we'd be working on a funky grid. So we'd have to say, you know, it'd be like 10 meters at a bearing of 155. You know, and it's just like so time intensive and labor intensive and just inefficient. Whereas if we just had something to visualize this in the field with our in-field data manager, if we're going to call it that, if they can see, you know, a red shovel test, like the example you said earlier, pop up and say, you know, we need one here, make it green. You know, they're just running around helping the team move quickly and efficiently around this site. That would be great if we could do that.
And I think that speaks to kind of, I mentioned earlier the Internet of Things, and the idea being that, you know, we create more and more devices that are connected to each other, forming more and more vast sort of data networks, right? So in a scenario where you're out in the field, I know that, you know, Chris and I sort of tossed around the ideas of how drones could be used. Well, you're talking about possibly linking drones with somebody on the ground who's wearing, you know, Google Glass or you know, Magic Leap or some other augmented reality device. Basically, being able to call up and see a sort of bird's eye view of the site, and then map and then lay over the data that you've been collecting, and then point you to the areas that you're talking about. You know, creating these sort of virtual environments out of what it's scanning. You know, a drone doesn't just have a camera; it could have sensors on it, detecting, you know, the depth and sort of scanning and sort of, like I said, creating that landscape. And you know, then you know, any number of devices can be integrated with it. I mean, even things that you already use in the field. Imagine if they're suddenly connected to another device and they can pass data back and forth between the two of them. And then, you know, when it comes to, we talked about, you know, having an internet connection. Well, if you have that internet connection now that, you know, when we bring internet to the world, so to speak, then you can do, there's concepts that we as a company work on that can be applied here. So for example, one of them is if we have Google Glass and we're streaming it in real time. So part of what we do in healthcare, the concept can actually be applied here. So, for example, if we take a doctor in rural eastern Kentucky, let's say we put Google Glass on a nurse and she examines a patient there. Well, that signal can be sent, live streamed to a doctor in a remote location in a bigger city. Let's say it's New York, it could be Louisville, it could be Nashville, any number of places. And then all of a sudden you're delivering world-renowned healthcare to somebody who's in a rural county, somewhere off in the woods. And the idea being, and the concept that I'm trying to apply here is a remote expert. So let's say, I don't know, you all have probably had these kinds of scenarios where you're out in the field and you need an actual archaeology expert to tell you what you're looking at. And whether it's something that's possibly like awesome or it's just nothing, right? Or just something not as serious. I don't know. Does that situation happen a lot? Does it just happen on at least once a dig, or just every other dig, or what's that like?
I'd say it varies project to project. Chris, you might have a different experience than I would, but at least back east, like we've got so many different experience levels, and if you're on a prehistoric site, chances are some of your crew aren't very familiar, and even though they know that they're within a prehistoric site, they could bring you rocks that are not actual artifacts, or they could be within a historic site and bringing you material that is not quite historic. But yeah, so in those scenarios, like having someone on the fly rapidly saying yes, no, this is what you need to do with this would be pretty great, especially if you're in a more data intensive situation like a full scale excavation. Having someone contributing their site interpretation as you're excavating could really change the way we're working in real time.
Yeah, it can also be used for training. You can wear Google Glass and kind of go through the different sort of processes involved on an on-site dig and show those to people who've never been on site and say, this is what it's like and the kind of things that you're going to do. You can only explain so much through video and, just pictures and diagrams, things like that. But actually showing, because remember, the glass is a first-person view. So it'd literally be like, this is what it's going to feel like when you're in this site and digging here.
Yeah.
Well, and, playing off of that actually is some of the more futuristic things I wanted to talk about. And maybe they're not futuristic. Maybe they're going to be available immediately when this comes out. But that's kind of the stuff I was thinking of. So two applications are, you record a bunch of information about a site, maybe even a bunch of video and things like that. And this stuff is either immediately or at least at the end of the day, worst case scenario, uploaded to company servers, and people back in the office or your client or somebody like that can upload all this to an auto stitching program that then sends it over to Oculus, and they can be sitting at their desk, drop on their headset, and walk around your site and see everything that's going on around right there. And then, even so, we do have some stuff sometimes where we don't know what we're looking at. And if we can record information and then send it to somebody, they can put on their device and just run around the site and say, okay, well, you've got exactly this. And I thought about the same thing when you mentioned drones earlier. We've had a lot of conversations about drones over on this crew, and I've got some pretty ambitious thoughts on drones. And I'm thinking of having like almost a 3-camera system on the drone, so it's collecting as much video information as possible. And we fly these drones across the landscape at close intervals, so we're recording 100% of the landscape. So somebody remotely could practically step into the world, and do like a virtual pedestrian survey without actually leaving wherever they're at. We can send this to them, and they'll have the resolution and the ability to point out artifacts, and then they'll like virtually take a point on that artifact and send that to an actual archaeology team that would go out in the field and record these artifacts, rather than because Chris the last week or so, I mean, he's walked
16 miles a day.
16 miles a day
through rocks.
And recorded almost nothing because there's nothing out there. But we still have to go over that landscape to prove that. If we could send drones out there and then only send archaeologists to the things that we find on our virtual walk over the area, then not only do we increase safety, but we increase efficiency.
Yeah.
So,
drones would be ideal, but I could settle for donkeys or a mountain bike.
Yeah. That kind of filming is actually already being done. It's actually what they call the sort of new frontier of filmmaking.
Yeah.
These people go out onto sets with 360 rigs. It presents a really interesting challenge for them because there's no behind the camera. You have to literally film scenes with nobody. Like, you can't like show the grips and people who are like managing audio or lighting or whatever it is around you. You have to literally be just in the middle of an actual scene, because somebody who puts on, let's say, an Oculus could take that film and literally look around the movie that you made on their own and dictate where the angle that they're viewing is. So that's very feasible to be done already. You could literally take that same camera rig through a site and then give it to somebody else on an Oculus Rift and make them feel like they were there too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the kind of stuff I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So, as far as technology in the sciences goes, so like Chris Webster owns the company DigTech, and he's been really innovative with using iPads and mobile apps in recording data in the field, which allows him to be more efficient than pencil and paper firms tend to be with things like that. And so that's already a leg up in the direction of moving toward making archaeology more cost effective, more time effective, which is pretty appealing to people when they're handing out contracts and considering, is archaeology even worth it? So with this technology coming out, granted there is quite a cost barrier to the initial stages of augmented reality and virtual reality and visualization. How can these things be presented as like worthwhile investments to the sciences? And how can these add to the sciences as, like politicians who are slashing funding and all that? How can they start to see the sciences as worthwhile investments with these things?
Well, that's certainly not an easy question for anyone to answer, I don't think. But off the top of my head, when I think of so, of course, I know that archaeology is done both at both at like universities, but also in the private sector. But I would think that universities, especially, would be positioned to reduce the cost of investing in this kind of technology because, for example, you're going to have students at least at any decent university who are working on software development, right? So they're going to have the kind of knowledge needed to, at least do some of the more rudimentary development of these kinds of platforms, and they can learn while they're doing it, right? And schools want to invest in this kind of technology because their whole selling point is we're going to equip you with the kind of knowledge you need to be marketable once you graduate. Well, and we've had a kind of relationship with the University of Louisville here where we've told them the same thing. We're like, we know that you have your curriculum, but there's certain things that you're not teaching them that are very valuable and that companies need. And if you just taught them, if you add this to your curriculum, they could get jobs almost anywhere coming right out because it's a need. So archaeology could actually help computer science and vice versa. It's a sort of symbiotic relationship in that sense, in terms of seeing where technology can be applied in different sectors, right?
Nice.
So that helps reduce the cost because it's going for education. And the idea of any of this technology that you mentioned before is to streamline processes, right? So I'll try and make an analogy here. We recently took on a pretty large project with a pretty large healthcare provider in terms of seeing how we can use technology to improve their processes. And it's funny how it comes down to the simplest thing, right? And it's in the way that they admit patients and examine and things like that. We saw a whole lot of redundancy. We saw a whole lot of them actually writing down data and then transferring that data from a piece of paper into another database. Well, if you eliminate that second step, you've just cut the time in half for them to treat people, right? So there's all kinds of redundancy. If you identify the redundancies, you identify an opportunity for technology to fix the problem and make it better, right?
Yeah.
So and not being intimately familiar with the archaeological process, I can't tell you where those inefficiencies are, but I can tell you that you just have to know what technology is capable of, and then say, well, how can we solve the problem? What's the best way? There's going to be several options. You just have to decide what's the most what's the most return on investment that you're getting.
Very nice. Yeah, and these visualization technologies could really bring an even greater return on the investment for any of the stakeholders, whether they're private or public. And even I'm seeing this as like a hypothetical situation. It could even improve the outreach capacity of archaeology if it's done with these technologies, so that the general public could use some kind of technology to explore sites and see the artifacts and walk around them and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, do you know how much I would pay to be able to just even put on Oculus and then walk around the pyramids of Egypt? Like that kind of thing. That's bringing the world in to someone who may never get the chance to go visit some site that they've always loved or been fascinated by. And I think that's a big part of it. So.
Yeah,
Steve, I don't know about the pyramids, but my goal is to bring to you the ability to walk around a historic 1940s trash scatter in the middle of the Southern California desert. I'm gonna bring that just for you, buddy.
Well, I did live with Chris, so I've kind of been in similar situations.
Hey!
You lived in a trash scatter? Nice.
I'm just poking fun. I was probably the messiest one there, actually, so I can't really say anything. But that's the thing. Bringing the world into people's laptops, phones, headsets, whatever it might be. That's where this technology that we've been talking about anyway. Can really, go.
Yeah, bringing that around a little bit more. A lot of big companies probably say, because they have to, that they're equal opportunity employers. But the reality is we're not as archaeology companies, because we can't employ people who are physically disabled in, below the waist.
Yeah.
If they're physically disabled, they can't be archaeologists in most cases because of the terrain and the access. I mean, you just can't get a wheelchair out there. I mean, if you got a sore knee, you can barely walk out there. So,
right.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. But if we did the thing with, say, the drone flyovers, where we'd fly over first, like I was saying earlier, and then have somebody run through that footage, we can teach people what to look for that don't even necessarily have archaeology degrees, because the people with the degrees will be the ones going out and actually recording what the people observing the information find. So you can have these people sitting in their wheelchairs, in their living rooms, whatever, with their Oculus on, viewing the data that we've presented to them. And I was thinking too, you could really teach anybody to do this, but ideally you'd want to teach people to have good attention to detail and a good work ethic and things like that. And one of the groups that's being used for that a lot, especially these days, because there's a growing number of them, is disabled veterans. There's a lot of programs out there using disabled veterans for different things that other people maybe can't do, because veterans will typically have a good work ethic, a good attention to detail, and they understand these things. They pick up stuff quick, especially the younger veterans these days. And using that workforce for this kind of thing would be really good. And not only that, but other people in those that are disabled, being able to not only just visualize these sites, but to actually work, and contribute and do something. So I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and this kind of touches back on something that Steve had mentioned earlier. It's like Steve had mentioned the capacity of these technologies to reach experts. But Chris, what you just said, these technologies could also reach citizen scientists, and kind of bring it out to the broader public and let more people be involved, which is kind of, the goal of anthropology, is to involve the people around it.
Well, and I had a sort of pie in the sky idea, based on two things. Well, based on really, Yeah, okay. So basically, two things that I remember hearing from the past. I don't know if you guys ever used the SETI at home screensaver, back in like the 90s and early 2000s. Yeah, so that was crowdsourced alien detection, except it wasn't really crowdsourcing. It was computer crowdsourcing because you didn't really do anything. But the next evolution to that was what was it called? Galaxy Zoo. Did you ever hear about that?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, well, Galaxy Zoo is basically, you've got the Hubble Space Telescope primarily, but then you've got other telescopes that are taking these deep field images of outside of our galaxy. And when you start looking at deep field long exposure images, and by long exposure I mean like 3 to 6 months, where they sit in one spot and they just let it collect light, and they find out that there are actually billions of galaxies within this one tiny little picture that they took. And the one first way that you identify galaxies, which helps identify their state of evolution and their formation, is their shape. And I think there was like 3 or 4 basic shapes, like spiral, elliptical, round, something like that. And it turns out computers are pretty bad about figuring out those shapes. Like, you can drop a computer, this image into a computer, and it's like, I don't know what the hell I'm even looking at. It just doesn't understand it for some reason. So they created this Galaxy Zoo thing where basically people go on and they're shown pictures of galaxies and they get these choices to choose from. And I think other is a choice as well. And the choice isn't nailed down until, somebody chooses this galaxy and that galaxy goes back into the hopper, and then somebody else sees it. And I think they have to have a correlation of something like 4 or 5 hits or more before it's accepted into the system and then eventually looked at by an astronomer, right? So the general public, anybody could go in and do this. And I'm not sure if they're still doing it or not, but I had the same idea with some of this archaeology stuff. As long as we remove location data and all that other identifiable information, they don't know whether they're looking at a survey area in Central Africa or Central California, right? So, we don't have any mountains in the picture. We don't have any identifying information like that. Now, the more savvy person looking at it might be able to tell where they're at by looking at the artifacts that they're seeing. But they're still not going to be able to pin down the exact location, which is always the fear that archaeologists have. So if you do something like this, you make this video public on a website where they look through this. When you get so many hits for certain artifacts or features or things that they're trying to find, because one person may not be able to see stuff where another person might be able to, and blah, 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 blah. You get it like 3 or 4 hits, that goes to the archaeologists in the field the next day, and they pull up their hit list for the day. Or maybe you just do all this and you give it a few months, and then you come back into the field work 6 months later with your hit list of stuff that was crowdsourced, and that at least 5 people saw this same thing, and you're going out to find something that 5 people thought, out of all the people that looked at it, there's something here for you to look at. And then we take to use our current survey area for an example, we take a 30,000 acre survey area that takes 6 months to survey, and we turn it into a 3-week effort where you're just going out to the places that actually have archaeology. And it was all crowdsourced, and you saved not only a ton of money, but a ton of time. And you included the citizens on whom the land we're working on, they technically own. So, it brings it all back around full circle. And that's the kind of thing I'd like to see come around. But that's going to take way more than the technology available. That's going to take some agency, willpower, and some other political machinations to come to light.
Nice.
So
some great marketing.
Yeah, basically. So, but let's wrap this segment up with some final thoughts on this stuff. I think I just kind of nailed where I want to go. Steve, is there anything we haven't talked about maybe that this could be applied to archaeology that we haven't gotten into that you're thinking of?
Not necessarily. I think we've covered a lot of good ground. This kind of technology is evolving all the time. I think it's important to keep in mind things like, I don't know if you've heard of Moore's Law. So essentially the pace of innovation is actually getting faster. We're making technology faster, more capable, and cheaper at the same time. So in the next, think about the last 5 years. In the next 5 years, we could see some pretty insane sort of developments with this hardware. And who knows, this conversation could be obsolete within a matter of months, for all we know. It's really moving at that pace. We're hearing it from Google. We're seeing it with there's a lot of companies out there that are being aggressive about innovating, and it's because we talked about big data before. We're collecting more data than ever, and we're able to prove the result before we ever go through with a project, right? So that I still think data really is a key to all of this. And Chris mentioned it before. We're now at the point where the only thing holding us back is how do we access and use it and spread and share these data sets. Because privacy is another thing. Privacy is a really big debate right now. It's something we've grown up with as a society, but technology is really I'm not going to say it's making it obsolete. I'm going to say that privacy is getting in the way. And we have to make decisions about what our priorities are. So I think those are going to be big developments that will change the sort of landscape of technology for everybody in any sector. But that's just my opinion.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and end this segment, and we'll have a little break for the APN, for the Archaeology Podcast Network, another podcast on there, and we'll come back and talk about our app of the day segment that we started last podcast.
Cool.
All right. Back in a minute. Still recording on paper in the field? Hate having to process hundreds of site records when you get back to the office and would rather go straight to report writing and research? DigTech has the answer. Hi, I'm Chris Webster, founder of DigTech LLC, a disabled veteran-owned CRM firm and archaeological technology research and development firm. At DigTech, we're creating applications for smartphones and tablets that will increase efficiency in the field and will keep archaeologists doing what they love, archaeology, and will reduce the amount of busy work in the office. Some of what we do involves enhancing existing third-party applications that are already on the app stores. Use our consultation form on the website at www.digtech-llc.com/tablet, and we'll help you figure out what digital solution is best for you. The cost of going digital is a lot less than you think, and once you do it, you'll wonder why you ever recorded on paper to begin with. Contact Chris over at DigTech, the parent company of the Archaeology Podcast Network, today, and let DigTech help you save paper, save time, save resources, and go digital. Now, back to the show. All right, we're back for our final segment, and we're going to do our app picks for the day, or for the 2 weeks, or however we're doing this. And there was one app that I was thinking of. I wanted to bring in, say, an augmented reality app that I've used, and I have one that I used a long time ago, and I'm going to talk about that right now anyway, even though it's not exactly doing what I wanted to right now. But it's called Layar, Layar. And it's an augmented reality app, and it was an augmented reality app like when the iPhone first came out. This app was really quick to jump on the iPhone.
I'm actually familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of the things I really liked about it early on, and it doesn't seem to be doing this right now, because there's lots of third-party layers you can bring into this thing that people create. And one of the things I really liked it for was mountain peaks, and you could just turn on the mountain peak layer, and it knew where you were located. It knew what direction your phone is facing, because all smartphones have a compass inside of them. So it knows where you're facing and it knows where you are. And you can see little dots on the mountain peaks out around you, and just click on that dot on your screen and get information about what peak that is and how far away it is and stuff like that. And you could set a range that it's looking out for you. If you've got, say, a ton of data coming in, if you're in a heavy area for whatever data you're looking at, you can just reduce the range to say, I only want to see a couple miles in front of me or something like that. And or probably even shorter than that. And so it's a free app, and it's worth downloading if you want to just check out some really fun augmented reality stuff. They're also getting into a lot of the, I don't know what you call it, like sort of icon-based augmented reality. Like the Starbucks mugs came out with that stuff a couple years ago, where you just point their app basically at the Starbucks cup, and it created this little animation right there on your table.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention, if I'm correct, if you download the Layar app and point it at I think it's Jack Daniel's label, which why would you? Because it's such a shit whiskey. But if you actually point it at the label, I'm almost positive that a video of my boss is going to come up.
No way!
Wow.
Yeah, because I'm again, I don't know if it was Layar. It was some augmented reality app, and I believe it was Layar. And we were talking about we were kind of in talks. Nothing came out of it. We were in talks of being in partnership with them for a while. Okay. So It's just a funny little anecdote that I had.
Nice. Well, if you want to have some fun with a little bit of augmented reality, that's a free app, and it can be a little buggy because they do bring in some extra stuff from other developers, and you never know what you're going to get. But there's a lot of things in there to play around with, though, so you'll find something that works. So that's my sort of pick of the day. Steve, what have you got?
Well, I didn't know I didn't know if there was a theme. I kind of just thought of a newer app that I use all the time now, and actually, I don't know if you've heard of Slack.
Yeah.
It's a messaging app, and we use it here at work to coordinate between our teams, and it's just great. I mean, it reminds me really of, you can have private channels, you can have really large channels with lots of people involved. You can break it down by project, by team, or whatever it might be. We even have a channel that's just like for us to talk about where we're going to lunch, because that's always a common problem. Is like, well, somebody's going to lunch here. Does anybody want to come with me or anything like that? And plus, we got a lot of people who work, heads down on development, so they got headphones on. It's hard to like kind of go around and talk to everybody.
Yeah.
So I love it. It's great. You can like make your own emojis and make like cool little GIFs and things like that. And it reminds me a lot of what was appealing about kind of, chat rooms back in the day, except
Right.
This is like multiple chat rooms, but only the people that you work with. And so you'd be amazed at the kind of ridiculous conversations you have, but also the kind of improvement in efficiency. When you can coordinate with multiple people through a really easy to use app that doesn't like eat data and it doesn't take away, it's not text. It can have rich media included in it, and you can archive it. So, for example, when my boss goes out to like the Google I/O conference, he can keep notes of things that he's learning in his sessions, and then at the end of the trip, come back, archive the conversation, and then and they'll have all those notes just right there. And at the same time, people who are in the office can see him actually send these notes in real time, so we can actually have conversations with them and say, "Oh, you should ask that guy this," or whatever it might be, right? So it's really kind of, messaging is sort of that is a really sexy sort of sphere for app development right now. It kind of really started with like Facebook Messenger, then they bought WhatsApp, and now you got Slack. But I think Slack has really perfected it at this point to where multiple different kinds of businesses can use it, and I think enjoy it, and I know we do.
Does Slack have a desktop component or web-based?
Yep, absolutely.
Component? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice.
That's like bringing the whole office to the conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I've heard about Slack before, but I wasn't sure really, how different it was than, say, just using Facebook Messenger or something like that. But I guess this day and age, not everybody uses Facebook or wants to use Facebook.
Right.
It seems like it sometimes, but not everybody does. I would imagine if a company even knows about Slack, then probably just about everybody there is on Facebook. But
right, true. I would recommend. It's a very interesting article was written about how they designed Slack. If you can, I think it was on Medium. If you want to like Google that and take a look at that, it's really interesting, some of the concepts they talked about, because you get to kind of go into the mind of a designer and see, well, how do we tackle this problem that's already been solved, 100 times over by other apps, and make it different and appealing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is when you come up with an app like that, is how do you be different and how do you be better, not just different.
Yep.
So
yeah.
Awesome.
Very cool. We'll have to throw the link to that article on Medium in our show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'll send it to you after the show.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well,
all right, Chris.
Yeah. So the app I have is by now it's probably a little archaic, but it's called Topo Maps, and it lets you It's probably maybe $2 to $4 on the App Store, the Apple App Store, and it lets you visualize all of North America. So if you're outside of North America, you're out of luck. But in North America, you can visualize it from a satellite imagery, and then you can look at, as you zoom in on different locations, it will bring up a grid, and each of those grids is a USGS 1 to 24,000 topo map, 7.5 minute grid. So, you can look at Louisville or Ridgecrest, California, and zoom in, and then you get your high resolution topo map, which is really useful for me in archaeology, because a lot of the state historic preservation officers require some kind of visualization on those topo maps. So while I'm in the field, I can already start to generate my graphics. And so you can create shapes, you can create points, and you can also import shapes and points into this app. And so it's a good way to just kind of really quickly be able to generate, these difficult to create maps. That otherwise you would kind of have to use in a GIS platform like ArcGIS or QGIS that's traditionally done in the office on a desktop and takes some time to get into the data. But here with a mobile platform, it's all like right at your fingertips and easy to use.
Well, and this seems, first off, I'm looking at it on the iPhone here, and it's $7.99 actually. But,
wow.
For the price, it says you can download the maps, and like you said, you can import and export waypoint files in GPX and KML and CSV formats, which I'm already thinking, Chris, for our current project area, we could download the maps and visualize the project boundaries on top of these topo maps pretty easily, it seems
exactly.
Which is nice, because right now we've got an app called MotionX GPS on all of our tablets where we're doing just that. The problem is MotionX GPS, while they will cache background maps for offline use, they're not topo maps, and they're pretty shitty. The ones that they cache, they only cache the MotionX GPS like basic apps without any satellite data or anything like that. So they're not really all that useful for where we're at, because without seeing the satellite image, or at least the topo image, I would love to have a topo map as a background, because it's not even that. So and this looks pretty good for the price. And just so people know too, I'm noticing here they have a topo maps for iPad version. It's not a universal app that you download. So you either download the iPhone version or you download the iPad version. Chris, do you know if this is available for Android at all?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would also add that at least in like Kentucky and Indiana, when I was using it the most, the state archaeology offices would require you to provide a lot more data about like elevation above sea level and stuff like that. And that's another thing that you can get really quickly, and you can get, like sub-meter accuracy GPS points if you can figure out exactly where you are on the map, correlate the iPhone GPS signal with, maybe a little ingenuity with looking at the topo map and say, maybe I'm a few meters off from that. You can get some really precise GPS coordinates, and you can even change the GPS datum too. So like you can switch between WGS 84 and AD 83, stuff like that. So it's got a lot of functionality for field scientists like us.
Nice. I like it. Well, I'm downloading it now. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Man, we keep doing this app segment. I'm going to run out of money, because I download pretty much everything we talk about.
Yeah, I'm just happy you're not sending me Candy Crush updates anymore.
Nice. All right, I think that about does it for this episode. We covered a lot of stuff. If you've got any, I'd like to see in the comments, if you go to www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeotech/this episode number, which I don't know right now. It's probably 17 or 18, but hopefully we did a show intro and it's in there. But if you go there and check out the show notes, also leave a comment and let us know what you'd like to see augmented reality do or virtual reality do for archaeology, because I'd like to see what other people are thinking out there, because I'm sure we haven't thought of everything, and there's a lot of stuff that could be done. Or, even if you think that we're full of crap and you should just record on paper and draw sketch maps still. I'm sure those people are out there. I'm not sure they're listening to this podcast right now, but I'm sure I'm sure they're out there. So
you can send the podcast to them in the mail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We'll print the transcript out.
Yeah, we need somebody to transcribe podcasts, by the way, just the Archaeotech one, so we can mail it to people in a newsletter. Nice. I think we just lost at least 2 people in our audience of 15. So anyway, all right. So we're going to kill it there. Leave a comment. Share this episode if you saw it, and we'll come back next time with another good episode.
All right. Yeah, and don't forget our iPad giveaway.
Yes, absolutely. Scroll back in your podcast and listen to that thing again so you know how to enter. This is a brand new iPad Mini 4, pretty decent. So it's pretty good. So go check that out.
I get one for just coming on the podcast, right?
Yeah, all guests also get an iPad Mini 4. They're in the mail with the newsletter.
That was the deal. That's why I agreed to do this. What, you think I want to? You think I want to do this? Come on.
Nice. All right. I think we'll just fade up the audio from that comment. Fade up the music. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I feel like after that comment, we don't have to say, thank you, Steve, because it sounds like he willingly came on.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.